Welcome to a live broadcast from the Intercept. I'm Mehdi Hasan. I'm here with my colleague Jeremy Scahill for the next half hour as we sit in our homes, and I hope you're at home as well, if you can afford to be, if you're able to be inside, socially distancing in this age of the coronavirus. We're going to be talking about the chaos, the pandemic, the virus itself. We're going to be talking about the so-called bailout bill that's currently making its way through the Senate. And we're going to be talking about the implications for politics in this country for the forthcoming presidential election in November and the Democratic response to all of this. Jeremy, I want to start by throwing you a very straightforward question, a question that we're all asking each other right now. What is life like in the midst of this pandemic? How has life changed, especially compared to what's gone on in recent years? This has been a crazy political climate, but 2020 is like nothing we've seen before.
You know, Mehdi, I think that we have to begin by just stating very clearly that Donald Trump and his administration are currently engaged in one of the most reckless policies in the history of this country. We have a grave threat that has not yet even started to hit in this country. When you talk about the scale of destruction that it's wrought in Italy, in China, in South Korea, across the globe, we have a deadly cocktail of incompetence, arrogance, and greed emanating from the highest positions of power in this country. And for many people, if you weren't in a targeted community, if you weren't a vulnerable person already in this country, maybe you could pretend that the threat of Donald Trump's authoritarianism and incompetence was something kind of far off. This is a threat now that is going to hit every sector of our society, and it's going to hit the most vulnerable people the hardest. And unfortunately, we don't have a fierce opposition in the form of the Democratic Party. Mitch McConnell is a far more competent and evil politician than any of his Democratic opponents. And so the response that we're seeing right now is what I think is going to be this lethal combination of socialism for corporations, minimal crumbs, if any, for many poor and working people in this country, and a president who is telling people that he's going to see them in church on Easter Sunday as the death toll continues to climb. And you see that the trajectory for the United States is a very sharp upward one. It's a very, very dangerous moment right now around the world, but particularly in this country.
A fantastic setting of the scene there, a depressing setting of the scene there. It's interesting you just mentioned at the end there, you know, he wants to see them in church. I like the way you phrased it there, Jeremy, because we've heard this quote, the clip is doing the rounds, Donald Trump on Fox News yesterday saying, "I'd love to see packed churches on Easter. It means a lot to me." A, we know it doesn't mean anything to him. The man is not a Christian in any shape or form. But B, do you think he'll be allowed to turn up to church? Because this is where the fundamental question comes down. We have a bunch of conservatives telling us this week, the Glenn Becks of this world, the Dan Patricks, the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, who basically said, "I'll die for my grandkids." And it's big talk. But really they mean, you know, they want others to risk their lives, others to die first. So the question is, Donald Trump wants to open up these churches and pack them out like a maniac in the middle of a pandemic. Would Secret Service, would the White House, would Dr. Fauci allow Trump to turn up and take his seat in those crowded pews, not 6 feet apart from everyone else, shaking hands with everyone? I'd be intrigued to see that happen, because I have a feeling that all of these people, they know what's going on. Fox News tell us every day that it's not a big problem, it's hysteria. And yet Fox News behind the scenes have canceled all in-guest bookings. No guests can come into the studios. They've got, I think, 6 cases of their own. You know, they're all working from home. It's funny, the hypocrisy of these people. They talk a good game, the right, but it requires calling out. And as you say, the Democrats haven't really been out there calling everyone out. I've not heard a senior Democrat come out and condemn the Lieutenant Governor of Texas for saying old people should die in this country.
You know, Mehdi, I'm speaking to you right now from a neighborhood in Brooklyn that is a very high density area. We have a very large Chinese population in my neighborhood. It's overwhelmingly an immigrant community. And the streets have been eerily quiet over the past days, but for a radical uptick in sirens. We are hearing ambulances, fire trucks. You're seeing a much heavier presence of police vehicles that are moving. People are really desperate right now in New York City. And while Governor Cuomo, I think, does deserve a substantial amount of credit for recognizing how serious this is, for taking on the Trump bureaucracy, Cuomo is simultaneously refusing to act on some of the most vulnerable people in our state right now, and that is people who are locked up in prisons and jails, people who work in prisons and jails. I fear that we are on the verge of a true catastrophe that is going to spread throughout all of the carceral facilities in the United States if action is not taken quickly. And you mentioned Dan Patrick of Texas, but it's not just fringe right-wing figures or Republican politicians. Matthew Dowd, who is ABC News, mainstream media, ABC News' chief political analyst, also was parroting the line that it's more important to save the economy than it is to save human lives. What we're seeing right now is a lot of people in this society telling on themselves how they really view the poor, how they really view our older citizens in this country. And it's not just fringe right ideas. This is the rawest exposition of capitalism that we could imagine, and what the actual intent of capitalistic social Darwinism actually looks like.
Lloyd Blankfein, who is nominally a Democrat, a former CEO of Goldman Sachs, also added his name to the list of people saying we need to reopen the economy now. What's so bizarre is the whole debate is pointless. Because if people start dropping dead in their hundreds of thousands, no normal economy can function. So I don't even understand the argument that on the one hand, you reopen the economy, on the other hand, you stay at home and save people's lives. The two go hand in hand. You can't have a functioning economy if 2.2 million people in this country die. And that is what Imperial College researchers in London have said. If you take no measures to stop the spread of the virus, you have no restrictions whatsoever, then 2.2 million Americans could lose their lives. It's an astonishing, unfathomable number. And you're in New York, where one day's death toll of 3,000 Americans on September the 11th, 2001, changed this country forever, changed the world forever, led to multiple wars across the globe that killed hundreds of thousands of people, led to changes in security measures and surveillance measures at home that are still with us today, because 3,000 Americans died in New York. And now you have the same party that was in power then basically saying, well, it's only New York. It's not in the rural areas. It's not in the red states. It's those blue state governors who really need to get things under control in their high density areas, which, by the way, the density argument is also another bullshit argument, because Hong Kong, Taiwan, last time I checked, quite high dense areas, and yet they've managed to contain the crisis. We haven't, because we have this crazy individual in the White House. And I want to ask you, Jeremy, do you think attitudes will change towards Donald J. Trump as a result of this crisis? Because right now we're seeing the kind of rallying around the flag effect, where 60% of Americans say they approve of his handling of this crisis, which makes me want to take a dull spoon and gouge out my eyes when I read that statistics. What do you think is going to happen in terms of people's reaction to him?
I'm from the Midwest, Mehdi. I'm from the state of Wisconsin, which of course is has become a very, very important state in particularly in presidential electoral politics. And I talk to a lot of people in so-called flyover country. And I understand why we see the Gallup poll that was released last night, where some people are, where you have 60% approval of how Trump is handling coronavirus. I think there's this perception that we need to rally around the commander, yes, even though it's Donald Trump. And I think that Trump is a much more effective speaker and messenger. Whatever we think about the lies that he tells nonstop, he is a much more effective salesman than the Democrats. And I think that right now, he seems to be winning this battle of fiction over science. But the fact is, we haven't even been hit yet in reality by the coronavirus. And over the next 2-3 weeks or month, if you really read serious scientific analyses, we are going to see a major death toll in this country. We are going to see hospitals, which are already overwhelmed, reach catastrophic levels. For nurses, both of my parents are nurses, for nurses to leave their duty stations, to go out into the streets and strike, demanding basic things like protective gear, masks, the equipment needed to use to treat their patients. That tells you how serious this situation is, and it hasn't even hit yet. Yeah. We looked. Our colleague Alice Sperry is originally from Italy, and she was talking. She recently wrote an opinion piece. She's not an opinion writer, but talking about the sense of solidarity growing up in Italy, and the fact that you do have minimal guarantees of healthcare, that you have universal access to affordable or free healthcare. In this country, among so many of Donald Trump's supporters, ignorance is worn as a badge of pride to own the liberals.
Yeah.
And, when you have Glenn Beck talking about, it's like he's talking about like he's a revolutionary from 1776 again. I'd be willing to die for all of this. Glenn Beck is going to have health care. Glenn Beck and politicians that make that ludicrous claim that the economy is more important than the lives of grandma and grandpa, those are people that are all taken care of. And what we're battling against in this country is not just the fascistic whims of Donald Trump, the Christian nationalism, creationism of Mike Pence, but we're also battling against a brand that Trump has really promoted where we put a premium on ignorance, where you put a premium saying, oh, I'm not going to listen to the doctors. We don't need to do that. I have my 15 AR-15 and my family is safe. So screw everyone else.
But as you point out, Jeremy, we're in early days right now. That may change once his base starts getting hit, sadly. And it is going to, Louisiana, Republican state with lots of rural areas, is now declaring an emergency. They've got it spreading there. It is going to spread, unfortunately, across the country. As you pointed out at the start, this is a virus that doesn't discriminate between rich and poor. I saw a story about, multi-gazillionaires trying to get their hands on private ventilators, and they can't. We're all in this, whether they like it or not. I just want to pick up on a couple of things you pointed out. You mentioned the kind of rallying around the flag effect, and I think that's definitely part of it. But also, I was interviewing Adam Serwer of The Atlantic for the podcast, for Deconstructed, and your podcast, Intercepted, came out this morning. Everyone should tune in. My podcast, Deconstructed, we're going to release this evening early. And I spoke to Adam Serwer of The Atlantic, and he made a very good point that a lot of low information voters in this country, a lot of average people, if they tune into the news, they tune into the evening news or local news bulletins. They're not obsessively on Twitter like you or I or others. And they see a sanitized version of Trump, a Trump whose clips have been packaged and edited and made to sound sane and coherent, where he sounds like he's taking action and doing stuff. They don't see the crazy, rambling, amoral freak who stands at the podium and mocks Mitt Romney and lies about his businesses and says crazy stuff about the Washington Post, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that definitely helps them. The media unwillingly, inadvertently, is an accomplice, I'm sorry to say, in kind of boosting the idea of Trump as some kind of sane and sober figure, when in fact he should be 25th Amendment in a long time ago by Mike Pence. And then on your point about Italy and Alicia and looking abroad, the fundamental problem in this country is not just ignorance, as you point out, because there's a lot of people, there are liberals, there are quote unquote centrists, there are Democrats who were on those beaches in Florida, who were in those bars in New York on Saturday night, who were going out saying either it won't affect me or it's all hype and hyperbole. And I do think there's a problem that people in this country, unfortunately, and I know this sounds like a stereotype, but haven't traveled very much. And as an outsider, as an immigrant in this country, I have to kind of shake people, including liberals, and say, you do realize other countries run their healthcare a different way. You do realize that other countries have paid sick leave as a norm. You do realize that other countries don't have people worried about going to get a test at the doctor, and they don't avoid getting tested for things like the flu or COVID-19 because they're worried about a bill. And I just think that is part of the problem. And then, for example, the economic rescue. You've talked on your show, I'm talking on my show tonight, about how the Netherlands is guaranteeing 90% of income to businesses who are hardest hit for their employees. The Danes are saying 75% of income. If you keep people on your payrolls, we'll give you 75% of your income until this crisis is over. The French are saying moratorium on all rents, on all taxes, on all utility bills. The Italians and the Spanish are saying no more mortgage payments until this is over. The Spanish nationalized their hospitals. And then you go, well, why can't you do that here? Why are we having a ridiculous debate about whether you save the economy or save 2.2 million American lives, when other countries in worse positions and poorer than the US are able to pull off both?
Yeah. Mehdi, I would also add to your excellent list there, the position that the Democratic National Committee took on the latest round of primary votes. And of course, also governors were a major part of this. But when you have the presumptive nominee of the Democratic Party tweeting rank ignorance out to his many followers and to the party, saying, if you are not exhibiting symptoms, go out to the polls to vote. That's reckless. I mean, how many people followed Joe Biden's atrocious, unscientific advice and were asymptomatic carriers? One of the things
we're learning, in long, crowded lines. We saw the pictures.
And we're seeing the cases spiking now in Florida and elsewhere. I'm not saying that Joe Biden is responsible for that, and maybe you hear the sirens in the background here at my house, but this is what we're dealing with now around the clock in New York City. We're hearing many more ambulances. But the point I'm making is that when you have the people that are supposed to be the responsible alternative to the lunatic that is in the White House right now, pushing unscientific, dangerous messaging to a very old base of supporters, because Biden's supporters tend to skew older, I think that is a really dark, ominous sign of things to come. And people can get really mad about criticizing Biden and say, oh, you're going to be helping Trump if you do this. The reality is that if Biden's team wanted to be honest, Joe Biden is not running in this primary. The Democratic Party establishment is putting together a team of technocrats, of experienced diplomats, of actual experts on pandemics. I think Ron Klain is, setting aside politics. Ron Klain, I think, did a pretty good job of handling the Ebola crisis in the Obama and Biden White House.
And he made a very good video for the Biden campaign on this crisis, which I urge everyone to watch.
Yes, I agree with that. But if you watch Joe Biden's recent television appearances and his attempts at using the internet, what you see is someone who is not completely with it. What you see is someone who forgets where he is, what office he is running for. He talks in a way that I think would be disturbing to anyone if that was their family member, to being out in public, even on the internet. And to me, this isn't about bashing Joe Biden. It's imagining what does it look like to be running Joe Biden against Donald Trump. Joe Biden, who has his own allegations of improper conduct toward women. Joe Biden, who has his own lengthy record of lying nonstop. The contrast we want to draw, those of us who believe that Trump is a fascistic threat to society, the contrast we want to draw is not, I'm the better liar, or yes, but nobody accused me directly of rape. I mean, this is a problem. This is a real problem.
It is a real problem, and let's talk about the Biden issue, because it's a real issue on the left. You and I, when we say things on Twitter about Biden, we immediately get attacked. I get attacked. In fact, not just attacked. Let me be fair. Friends of mine, people who I respect. In fact, let me just do a humble brag here. A Hollywood A-lister DM'd me yesterday saying, "Can you shut up about Biden? I'm like you. I wanted Bernie, but Biden is the guy now, and we need to get behind Biden." What do you do about this argument that says, you know what, at the end of the day, he's the presumptive nominee. Bernie Sanders, the route to victory is gone. Michigan was a kind of nail in the coffin. He's going to be the nominee. We can have fantasies about whether, another candidate steps in his place at the DNC convention, which is probably not even happening now. But what do you do about the fact that he is the only alternative to Trump? He's clearly better than Trump in almost every regard. Therefore, is it incumbent upon those of us who want to fight fascism and white nationalism and racism from the highest office in the land to pull our punches, or at least to focus on the quote-unquote prize, which is Trump and his kind of just everyday awfulness and dangerousness?
I think Joe Biden should be thanking the good Lord that Bernie Sanders has not just dropped out of this race, because Bernie Sanders right now is overwhelmingly focusing on trying to get urgent aid to people in need in this country. And he did something that I think is really smart. He took his substantial organizing networks, his fundraising networks, and he turned it into a fundraising mechanism for some of the more vulnerable communities being impacted by the coronavirus. But also, as much as people don't like to hear this, half of the Democratic primary voters have not had a chance to weigh in yet. Circumstances have, in fact, changed. If you want to act like this is a democratic process, and someone wants to stay in the race because they believe with all of their heart in fighting for Medicare for all, they believe in stopping wars of U.S. aggression, I don't think that is anything that is going to damage Joe Biden. Joe Biden is doing enough damage by either hiding, or when he does appear in public, looking and sounding the way that he does.
Yeah, this is where I'm torn, because I get the arguments that, and I slightly differ from you. I do think there clearly has to be damage the longer a primary race goes on. That's just the reality of primaries. I'm not saying that means that Bernie Sanders should pull out. I'm just saying that's the political reality of the world we live in. But on the other hand, I hear the arguments that say Biden's the guy, just get on with defeating Trump on the left. I get that argument. On the other hand, as you point out, when he does turn up, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, come on, show me that I'm wrong. I've never wanted to be more wrong about anything in my life than Joe Biden's candidacy and his prospects for defeating Donald Trump. And by the way, let's just be very clear, you and I both work for the Intercept. We're speaking here in a personal, private capacity about our personal views, not for the organization or anyone else. But just to be clear, when we talk about Biden, he turns up and he's bad, as you say. He says and does mad stuff. And I just feel like the kid in the Emperor's New Clothes who's screaming, there are no clothes. But we're surrounded by a lot of people on our side of the political divide who are saying, no, he's fine. It's good. Stop exaggerating. This is all madness. Even our colleague Murtaza Hussain made a good point and said, look, I had issues with Joe Biden, but then I watched him debate Bernie Sanders. He's clearly all there. So there is good faith discussion here about how far do you go with this argument that he's clearly a bit doddery and past it, and just say, you know what, that's irrelevant right now. Ultimately, he's up against an insane, dangerous guy who wants to kill millions of people to get reelected. That's the choice.
If Joe Biden does do what seems to be clear he is most likely to do, which is to get the Democratic nomination, then I think we have to have a very painful discussion among people who are Sanders supporters or who are political independents that may align with Democrats that are more like AOC or Rashida Tlaib, and really call the question on what we believe in. My position in 2016, by the way, was that on the issue of the Supreme Court alone, it was justification enough to vote for Hillary Clinton. I mean, there are many other issues you can debate. I don't think anyone who is a reasonable person that is a Sanders supporter wants Donald Trump to be president for 4 more years. At the same time, we are in the middle of a Democratic primary here where the front runner does not seem to be mentally capable of carrying on this race, where he has a track record of right-wing policies, where he is one of the most responsible parties for one of the worst Supreme Court justices in history, Clarence Thomas, being on the court. And I feel like it is incumbent upon everyone of conscience in this country who wants Donald Trump gone to ring the alarm bells about the danger of running Joe Biden until it's a fait accompli. And it is not a fait accompli.
Fine. So
I'm not going to back off of this. We were right about what was going to happen to Hillary Clinton in 2016. It was poorly run campaign. She had horrible trade positions, and she was unfairly attacked in a misogynistic way, a despicable way. And she unfortunately carried the baggage of her husband's presidency with the super predators stuff, the crime bill.
But sadly, Jeremy, as I've been shouting for weeks, nobody seems to have learned any lessons from 2016. I hear the same arguments being made. People come to me and say, but he won all the black vote, so he's strong in the gap. So did Hillary Clinton. Didn't help her in November when a lot of black people stayed at home. Didn't like either choice. I hear people saying to me, at the end of the day, Trump is crazier than Biden. You can't compare the two. Of course you can't compare the two. Trump's on a different level. But the idea that Trump is going to play fair, you think they don't have, Trump's kids have been going around mocking Biden. They're utterly shameless, Jeremy. If our father was Donald Trump, we would never make fun of anyone else's mental position. But we'd be like, better not say anything, otherwise somebody will point out our dad. These guys have no shame. And I hear Democrats saying stuff, almost acting as if it's going to be a fair fight. Well, I shared the Donald Trump tweet this morning where he mocks Biden's interviews. With another journalist, and he made the point that why are you sharing bad faith stuff from Trump, which is true. It's bad faith from Trump. On the other hand, what do you think Trump's going to do come November? It's all going to be bad faith. And unless liberals and Democrats are ready for the relentless attacks that are coming Biden's way, yes, I do worry that the Democrats are completely screwed because this is who they're up against. They're up against the most vicious attack machine in modern Western political history that I can think of. And they decided to put up a guy who went on TV this week. I don't know if people at home saw the Jake Tapper clip where he coughs into his hand. Then Jake says, Mr. Vice President, you're supposed to cough into your elbow. Yeah. And instead of just laughing and say, yes, I forgot, he says, no, it's fine. I'm alone at home. Number one, it's not fine, even if you're alone at home. Number two, you're not alone at home. Are we expect to believe Joe Biden set up his own internet link to talk to CNN? Don't be silly. So he just makes stuff up after doing stupid things. Now, I must add a quick caveat here. He is leading in the polls, Jeremy. A new poll came out this week. He's beating Trump in all of the swing counties that he needs to win. So we shouldn't write him off. He clearly still is, if you just look at the numbers, the favorite.
Well, ask Nate Silver how his predictions went in 2016. I mean, I think that Trump is a very unusual political force in American politics. And I think one of the great untold stories of Trump's electoral college victory is that he mobilized a large group of non-voting racists, bigots, absolutely ignorant people to come out and vote. It was akin to the kind of get out the evangelical vote of Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush in the 80s. And the other thing is that polls are very flawed and difficult to read. But let's just accept the premise right now. I realize Joe Biden is winning this primary, and he is largely winning this primary based on the support of African-American community, African-American voters, and also suburban voters and older voters. And those are all very important, essential aspects of Democratic victories. The Democrats, however, have a very long history of willingly and enthusiastically choosing very bad candidates who get killed in the general election.
John Kerry.
Look, yes, but we didn't see President Michael Dukakis. And, we can talk, if we want to talk about dirty tricks during a Democratic primary campaign, we could spend an hour talking about Hillary Clinton in 2008 against Barack Obama. But Mehdi, let me
run out of time. I do want to ask you this very quickly, Jeremy. Andrew Cuomo is winning lots of plaudits. You mentioned earlier he does need to release those prisoners, especially elderly prisoners who've been in for decades, pose no threat and are very, very high risk. But otherwise, he's winning plaudits for his handling of the crisis, his sober press conferences, his dynamic posture elsewhere away from the prison system. Some people, even liberals, are saying, can't Andrew Cuomo be the Democratic nominee? You know what? I would say, I'll take Cuomo, I'll take Mayor Pete. People say to me, oh, you're just annoyed about Bernie Sanders losing. My position is your position, that I actually worry about Biden losing. I would take any centrist or right-wing Democrat over Biden right now, including Andrew Cuomo, who has huge flaws, and the progressives have huge problems with the mayor of New York. But right now, wouldn't you take Andrew Cuomo over Joe Biden as the Democratic presidential nominee?
Well, I think with Andrew Cuomo, you're absolutely getting someone who is fully competent. We can have disagreements about his policy. My friend Alan Nairn, the great journalist, says there is virtue in hypocrisy, that when Democrats are in office, you're talking to people who speak the same language and you can argue with them. With Trump, we're in la-la land. If Biden's going to be the nominee, be honest that what you're really running is a committee of technocrats, experts, and you're running on his cabinet, because Joe Biden is not the nominee, even if his name is on the ballot. And if he is the nominee, if he is the guy that we want to stake all of this on, Trump's going to fillet him.
Well, and we also don't know who his vice presidential nominee will be. That will be an interesting
factor.
He said it will be, for once, I think it will be a bigger, normally people talk about vice presidential nominees, but actually they don't really make a big difference when it comes to voting. This time around, it may have a bigger influence given the fact that Joe Biden clearly can't be more than a one-term president. So that will be interesting. But let me just bring it back to the virus before we run out of time. We have this pandemic. We have the economy shut down. We have Donald Trump talking about wanting to reopen the economy, whatever that means. And we have this bill, which Senate Republicans Mitch McConnell have shamelessly tried to put through with all sorts of corporate bailouts. Bernie Sanders has said this afternoon, I think just before we went live, that he will only vote for it if if the $500 billion corporate slush fund that Senate Republicans want to give to Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, if that is dealt with. There's a debate on the left. Should Democrats say no and hold out for more, or is it more important to get aid out to people who need it as soon as possible? Where do you stand?
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely with the sentiment behind Bernie Sanders, but just talking to my family in the Midwest, small business owners, low-wage workers, working poor, people are desperate right now. I think it's an absolute shameless shit bill, but we are going to lose more lives right now, and I think that unfortunately we didn't have the kind of backbone on Capitol Hill to truly fight Mitch McConnell. We didn't have leadership from the presumptive nominee. And I think that too many people are suffering right now. And this is another case where I think we have an urgent need and we have to meet it. And I think if we can get money to people who are suffering right now, it's more important. We can fight that another day. But I think it's more important. And I'll just end with this, Mehdi. Watching Elizabeth Warren and the way that she has been doing battle on Capitol Hill, she's been one of the best, if not the best Democrat dealing with this. And watching Bernie Sanders trying to ram through protections for gig workers and low-wage workers, wouldn't it have been a different reality if the debate was between, do we want Bernie Sanders or do we want Elizabeth Warren, or if it was a Sanders-Warren-Sanders ticket, I think they would have crushed Donald Trump. I think they would have crushed him.
It's a great point, and it's interesting to see that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have been two of the strongest voices among Senate Democrats, although there have been some other very powerful Senate Democrat voices as well. But yes, you're right to make that point amongst the presidential candidates, and we should do a shout out. Amy Klobuchar's husband tested positive, and is from her tweets seems to be having a horrible situation, and we can pray and think about him and hope he recovers. What I would say this, while we're talking about, before we wrap up, I would say this. A lot of people in my family, you mentioned your parents being nurses. A lot of people in my family are doctors. And I would say the doctors, the nurses, the healthcare professionals, we go around saying that they're heroes during this crisis in places like Italy and South Korea and here in the United States. But what is happening on America's front line in those hospitals is an absolute scandal. I can't believe that we are okay with the fact that in the richest country in the history of the world, people don't have PPE, don't have the protective equipment they need, don't have the gowns, don't have the ventilators, don't have the masks, that the CDC asked nurses to wear bandanas from home. I just find it astonishing, grotesque, disgusting, inexcusable. And I would say this, when Donald Trump was asked this week why he didn't invoke the Defense Production Act and force companies to start manufacturing the equipment, he said, well, we can't be like Venezuela, we can't interfere with the free market. And yet, there's this bill going through that's going to give corporations billions of dollars. Is that not interfering with the free market? I really, really think if this crisis doesn't change people's minds about capitalism, about healthcare, about bailouts, I don't think anything ever will. And I hope it does. We're going to leave the conversation there. Jeremy, thanks for taking time out.
Thank you, Mehdi.
Thank you all for watching at home. Do please go to theintercept.com to read our journalism, support our journalism, support our organization. Do check out Jeremy's podcast, Intercepted, which dropped this morning. Do check out my podcast, Deconstructed, which drops in a few hours. And check back here to this place on the internet where those of us at home during this crisis will try and keep you informed and educated. We'll try and do this again if you all want us to do it again. Thanks so much. Take care. Stay safe. Wash your hands.